All right, welcome to my kitchen for the making of ancient Egyptian kapet, otherwise known as Kyphi or kupar, a temple incense that was burned each day in the ancient Egyptian temples as a way of welcoming the night, as a way of throwing wide the doors of imagination and vision, welcoming dreams. And it's notable that, like in the ancient world, dreaming was a way of communicating with spirits and with the gods. So this is also an incense that was used and burned to invite that communication, to facilitate that communication. Notably, it's an incense that was also in several of the manuscripts used medicinally. In one of them, it's used as a treatment for asthma. Later on in the Greek and Roman world, where there's a lot of cultural exchange and bleed over from Egypt to Greece, from Greece to Rome, there's some reports that it's still being used for like coughs and congestion. It was also a breath mint. So one of the things about that is it tells us when we're trying to recreate the recipe for this incense that all of the ingredients had to be reasonably edible. I say reasonably because there's plenty of things in the ancient world that people would eat that we might not want to eat today, that had some toxic effects, especially hallucinogens, that might have been included in this. One of the very questionable ingredients, we don't have a hard definition for it, is peker, which is transliterated Peker in most of the manuscripts. It appears with some hieroglyphic images that are suggestive of a sycamore fig tree. But the problem with that is the sycamore fig tree glyph was used kind of universally in Egypt for anything indicating a tree because that tree was so sacred and foundational to their belief system. It was a giving tree. It was a tree associated with Osiris and with Hathor and with Mother Goddess and a ton of different things. Notably, in the sort of syncretism that happens, as much as this tree was associated with Isis and other giving and supporting, loving goddesses, there is a surviving sycamore fig tree in Egypt that has become equated with the Virgin Mary. And it's very probable, first of all, that this tree is old enough that it goes all the way back to the cult of Isis, and that it was the tree associated with her. And when Mary came along, they sort of like equated Mary with Isis to sort of shift the belief over. That was a really common thing. Probably the most noteworthy place that happened, far from Egypt, is in Ireland, where Saint Bridget or Brede was a goddess who had a very fervent following. And when Christianity came to Ireland, they couldn't really get rid of Bridget as a goddess that people looked up to and worshipped and wanted to follow. And so, in fairly typical fashion, what the Catholics did at the time, uh, the church took Bridget's story and they kind of retooled it so that she became Saint Bridget. Instead of just being the goddess, she became the nursemaid of Christ. And if you use your brain, it doesn't make any sense. They elaborated a whole story where the Holy Family took a side trip from their journeys in the Middle East and ended up in Ireland, of all places. Only Mary had business elsewhere. You see, it's very important. She had to go somewhere, but the baby Jesus was still nursing, so she left Jesus at that point with her best Irish friend, Bridget, and Bridget became the nursemaid of Christ. And this is part of the official hagiography. That's the formal story of the saint for Saint Bridget, who pretty undeniably used to be a goddess before she got dubbed a saint because they couldn't get rid of her otherwise. The same thing happens with Isis and Mary in a lot of things. Like there's a lot of crisscross. It's how you end up with like the Black Madonna. Look it up. I don't want to get too distracted because we have a small window to talk about things today. Anyway, so what I'm doing is the next day's work of making this incense. It is a process that happens over multiple days. In the original process of creating this incense, you are reconstituting the body of Osiris. You are putting a god back together step by step. So it is a sacred act, and each ingredient is representative of things. In addition, if I were doing this completely authentically, there would be hymns and prayers for each step of the way. To our knowledge, there's no record of what those hymns or prayers were. The recipe I'm working from was left on the walls of the laboratory room in the temple complex at a place called Edfu in Egypt. They were really clever. This is where you made all the stuff, and they just put the recipes on the wall where you could see them. One of the reasons I am using the Edfu recipe over several other ones that have come down to us is the Edfu recipe has measurements. So you get an idea of like how much frankincense versus how much gum mastic versus how much cinnamon all went in. And let me tell you, their quantities were like 3.3, the equivalent of 3.3 liters of this and liters of that. So we're talking like, pounds and pounds. So I had to reduce this significantly. I believe at this point I am working at 150th of the original ingredients. Today, pine resin and gum mastic, only 3 tablespoons of each. For those of you following along at home who want to recreate this incense themselves, a lot of the ingredients are costly, and one of the hardest ones to get a hold of is gum mastic. Now, gum mastic is going to look to folks who do stuff with incense a lot like frankincense. It is another resin from a tree, and it's widely used in incenses across the ancient world and the Middle Ages, to be honest with you. It is also chewed as an actual gum. It has properties with that aid in digestion, acid reflux. You will find ground gum mastic in health food stores because of these reasons. The problem with gum mastic at this point, it's sometimes also marketed as Chios gum. That'll look like a little funny X, I-O-S. Sometimes it's spelled C-H-I-O-S. That is the name of the island where it grows. At this point, there's one island where you can harvest gum mastic. That's not to say that the trees that give gum mastic only grow on that island. It's more complicated than that. So a lot of these trees that give us these resins give the resin only under certain environmental situations. And it's actually a little sad to realize that the trees only give us these tears because they're upset. They are literally weeping because the circumstances in which they are growing are not ideal. So we are using 3 tablespoons of the tears of stressed out trees from the island of Chios. And that is going to go in and get mixed up with pine resin. Obviously, in the Egyptian original, the pine resin would be from trees that were local to the area. This is wild harvested from some trees in Georgia, so it's not going to be precisely the same type of pine. You may find this marketed under rosin. It is used widely for folks who play violin to put stuff on their strings and make them a little easier to work with. This is also marketed in a lot of sports stores because this is the stuff that you powder your hands with so that you don't slip when you were doing gymnastics and climbing ropes, things like that. Now, the pine resin is pretty high in terpenoids, from which we get turpentine, which is one of the reasons why at first I was like, but are we sure it's pine resin? There's a chance that it's supposed to be terebinth, which is from the tree, if I'm going to pronounce it correctly, and I apologize if I murder it, Pistachius terebinthus. That is native to the areas around ancient Egypt. And try as I might, I could not find any resource by which I could acquire, costly or otherwise, the gum from that tree. So several of the recipes say pine resin, there's already pine nuts. There's a lot of reports that this incense has on some level of it a very piney, resiny scent that is more than just the frankincense. So Notably, gum mastic also has a bit of a piney feel and taste to it. So this step is, it goes into my handy molcajete, and we powder it down, and I try not to breathe it while I talk to you.
There's been actually a bunch of comments on your shirt.
Yep. So, not that I'm a walking commercial, but this was from a Canadian company called shirtpunch.com. They were working with the Hannibal folks and did a bunch of limited edition t-shirts that you could only get like for 24 hours. And I bought like 3 of these. Because, I mean, like...
The things you like are what you like.
Yeah, they're what I like, and I don't like them to go away. They inevitably do. And so... I have a Hannibal t-shirt that is also Shiva, that is also like that whole moment, if you've watched the series, it's pretty cool and creepy with the murder husbands and their strange romance. So here we go, grinding the gum.
Somebody's asking about when this batch will be ready. When can people buy this batch?
Okay, so... if it plays out the same as the batch I made around this time last year, while I could feasibly probably package it up as early as August, I think it will be best for it to cure. I really found it takes, like everything I've read said, it will cure for a long time, and I didn't quite wrap my head around how long. Probably October at the earliest. So this is a little bit like brewing. You do all of this work, several steps, and then once you're done with like the main part of it, you have to set it aside and just let it rest, let it do its thing. In this case, it not only becomes firmer with time as some of the moisture evaporates out of it and it cures, also the scents deepen, become more complex. There's some debate if there's like some kind of fermentation or something that's going on with it. Certainly, like one of the ideas is that it starts with dried fruit. And if you have, like so many people in quarantine, begun making sourdough, you may know that if you couldn't get a hold of yeast through any other means, you can make yeast if you have dried fruit, raisins especially. If you ever looked at grapes and they've got like that kind of like white stuff on them, they've got must, you can make yeast from your grapes. I don't remember the link, but there was a biologist whose specialty was yeast and the DNA of yeast, who posted some neat instructions on how to make your own yeast at home so that you are not out of luck when everybody on the planet has decided that they need to make their own little sourdough batches. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
There's a question about what people could substitute for pine nuts in the recipe. There's an allergy.
Yeah, I'm not sure with the pine nuts. So as far as I can tell, like there's not much of a smell to the pine nuts. It seems to be more their texture and some of like the fibrous stuff that they bring to it. And in that respect, I'm not sure what would be perfect, because like a grain doesn't quite do it, since as a nut they almost turn into like a nut butter when you grind them. Also note, although pine nuts is the translation through multiple scholarly resources on this, I'm kind of like, but are you sure? Pine nuts, really? Like, I've used them twice. They don't seem to add or detract so much as they just seem to add substance. What would be a good substitution? If there's another nut, a mild nut, or seed that you can actually, maybe, thinking about it, possibly sunflower seeds. And that would actually follow like kind of 2 things. If the pine nuts are in this recipe more for their symbolism, which I think is the case in some of the ingredients, a sunflower as a solar flower makes some sense, sort of metaphorically, with some of the intentions, at least the gods being invoked with this. The religious system of ancient Egypt had a lot to do with the sun. They had so many solar deities, it's kind of confusing. I know some folks were like, please give us links to books that let us do a little research on the mythology and the religion and the history of ancient Egypt. And I got to tell you, the religion is incredibly confusing because it spans a great period of time, 3,000 years and some change. And I like to describe the ancient Egyptians as intellectual pack rats. They never met a god that they didn't want to just keep and add into somebody else's pantheon as they went along. So you've probably heard of Ra, who is a sun god, and you've probably heard of Amun Ra, who is also a sun god, and in most mythologies most of the retellings of the myths is represented as just another form of Ra, except Amun and Amunet go way back, and they are this sort of primordial pair, a male and female, that represent basically you've got creator gods who get added on to other creator gods. It's a little bit like Saint Bridget. They couldn't get rid of Saint Bridget and the folks who found her compelling. And so when the major religion of Ireland and the British Isles shifted from their initial religion to Christianity, rather than erase Bridget, they just subsumed her. She was assimilated, and she was given a myth that sort of explained that, and that myth got passed down as this is the new truth. And that happens over and over and over again in Egypt with their gods and goddesses. So you've got so many different creator gods and so many different creator stories and solar gods. But end result, I think for the texture it adds and the way it grinds, I would go with basically raw unsalted sunflower seeds, if those are something you are also not allergic to.
Cool.
All right.
Let's see, there was a question about charging the Kyphi. Would it make it more effective, basically, to charge it every so often, every month or so?
The idea of making it over the period of days that you're making it is like each time you are focusing on it, you are charging it, you're putting your time, your effort, your attention into it. I have considered like writing up little prayers or recitations to say over it to kind of like help with that focus. But to be honest, anything that would be appropriate to the Kyphi would be Osiris or Isis based, and I'm team Set, so I couldn't do it with a straight face. I'll be honest. So rather than that, I think about the purpose it's going to be put to. And my goal with recreating this incense initially was to use it as a past life trigger, a potent scent to bring into ritual and into regressions and meditations where people were trying to open those doors to their past, especially if they felt they had a tie to temple cultures in the time period in which Egypt was operating, where this incense would have been burned. Notably, it wasn't exclusive only to Egypt. Like, this was passed along. So you have recipes that show up in Syria. You have recipes that show up in the Greek and Roman magical papyri. And so it was an incense that a lot of people found very compelling and useful. Would it help to revisit it as it is curing and put some intention into it? Absolutely. And if that's part of your practice, you can really make something that's very, very potent. I was discussing with someone on here who said that they used currants instead of raisins as the base for the fruit, of maybe adding into this one a little bit of black elderberries. I don't want to add so many that it will change the scent, but given the healing properties and what's attached to our belief of what those are doing for people, making this a batch also aimed with a little bit of healing energy doesn't seem like a bad idea. So we have nicely powdered gum mastic and pine resin.
Oh, can you show it again?
Okay, yeah. Gum mastic and pine resin down to a powder. Don't breathe it.
Smells great.
Yeah, if you get it on your fingers, which you will, a little bit of olive oil before you wash your hands, like rub them very carefully in olive oil and then wash the oil off your hands. It'll prevent them from being ridiculously like dry, sticky.
Oh, somebody said they loved you on the recent Portals to Hell episode.
I got to watch
Coming up
that
with
today.
Elemental name.
Okay, so I didn't get to like personally experience everything that happened in that episode. I was just, I was there. I forget what it was that we had going on, but I had to come home a specific day. Like they'd asked me to stay the whole time, and I'm like, guys, I gotta go. We can't even.
I think we had a class actually at
Yeah.
Inspiration
Oh, that's
House.
right. Yeah, it was an Inspiration House.
Yeah,
It was a retreat weekend.
That was the first retreat.
Yeah. So like there was no way that I could stay,
Yeah.
even though they were like, please, like please. Because I wanted to like hang out and try to talk to the elemental a little bit more than, I mean, at that point, like it had given me its name. We were getting somewhere, and then I had to go. But I just watched it, and I had goosebumps. I was there, and I had goosebumps. That was a heck of an episode.
Someone's asking if it's possible to get the recipe so they could make it at home.
Yes, I have been posting several times. I think at this point I might just put it up on my website. And after this one, I kind of want to like put my head to the process of like, what's the simple version? Like there's this, made by the book ancient thing that has some really costly stuff. And is there a way to get the same effect and the same scent as close as possible with maybe substitutions and maybe a couple of other options? And we have gotten to the point where I had originally put a cup and a half of wine in here. The recipe allows for another cup and a half of wine. And I am going to, because this is now hitting the point where everything is very soaked in, we are going to put in another half a cup of wine and try to keep track of that. Mark it off later so that I can mix this up and it can do its thing. Okay, so the fun part, you might, if you want to pick something, like, because this will do a really cool thing.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it when I picked up this wine. It's effervescent, and so if you can get it, it's gonna.
Yeah, here we go.
Ooh, chemical reactions, because alchemy is chemistry.
It smells amazing too.
All right, so I'm gonna mix it all up. The reason it is in a copper pot is also for chemical reactions. This copper vessel was probably the most expensive. Well, no, it's not actually the most expensive thing, because if you think ounce per ounce, some of the frankincense and other things were stupid expensive. The gum mastic is also not cheap. So the copper vessel is hand forged from a family, a lineage of coppersmiths in Italy. And there were two places I found online where I could find a guaranteed unlined copper vessel for making a couple of specialty foods. One is Mauviel in France, and they make little copper pots mainly for sugar and candy making. And this one is for an Italian dish. I think it's a risotto pot. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, actually, I think it's risotto, because it needs like a long, slow heat. Copper is not something you should cook most food into, especially anything that is acidic, because the copper it leaches into the stuff. That's the purpose here. And it has some chemicals to it, and you don't necessarily want to eat all of those. It's antibacterial. It's got a lot of very interesting qualities to it. And yes, I save all of my little chopsticks, tiny little bamboo throwaways, because I think they are fantastic tools in the kitchen. And why just throw them away for one use?
They are wood. It's not like they go bad.
No, they're great. All right. So step 3 is done. And now we're going to set it back over there and let it set for the night. And tomorrow, I believe tomorrow's ingredients are going to be cinnamon and pecar, which is the most disputed ingredient. Several people have made reference to an Anthony Bourdain Morocco episode where pecar may turn out to be hashish, and that wouldn't surprise me. The one thing I can say from looking at the hieroglyphs, it's a plant. It has a determinative at the end that indicates seeds. So it's something that has tiny seeds you're probably using. So it's either a plant that has like everybody argues on like what it's actually supposed to be though, and like even what the determinative is supposed to mean. But part of that determinative is a sycamore tree, not U.S. sycamore, but sycamore fig, which is a very unique tree. So it could be everything from the sycamore fruit, which in this tree are like marble sized, and they have to be pollinated by wasps. It's a really weird tree. Like it's got a symbiotic relationship with a wasp, and it only reproduces and only makes viable fruit if a thing happens with this wasp and this fruit that I won't go into, but like look it up. It's weird. And while they, I believe, don't grow in Egypt anymore, except for a very few of them, like the one I mentioned, the tree that is associated with the Virgin Mary, they generally, most writings about this tree suggest Egypt is where it started. Yeah, it's a neat, strange tree. Anyway.
Is that question unrelated to Kyphi? Do you want to?
Oh yeah,
okay.
I can do some stuff. Actually, let me pick this up and move it out of the way. Clean up a bit in the lovely kitchen that was a gift of my wife spoils me. My kitchen did not used to look this cool.
So the question is actually interesting. It's got a couple of different parts.
Okay.
I'll just read it.
All right.
I know you don't believe in demons. So what are your thoughts on the Dead Files show?
I mean, I won't say that I don't believe in demons. I don't believe that everything people call a demon is a demon. I have a different approach to it. And I will say that I have definitely encountered spirits that fit the bill. Like I have a very narrow set of criteria for something that I will allow. This is collectively what we agree a demon is. Non-human, very intelligent, actively malevolent, for some reason fixated on people, especially toward some type of control up to and including possessing them against their will, because there's plenty of spirits that will possess people all with their consent, and that's a whole different ballgame. So a bunch of people have been asking me about the Dead Files basically because I went off on a rant on Twitter a couple of days ago because someone had come to me asking, is this thing that I was charged a fair rate? And it was like to the tune of $8,000, and my head spun around because like the thing is that person was under contractual obligations, so all I know is what they were charged. I don't know who charged them. I don't know what show it was connected to. I just know this is the service they were promised, and here's like how that broke down for what they had to pay. All of that said, everybody keeps asking me about the Dead Files. I haven't seen the show. I know that'll sound weird to people because I work in the paranormal, but remember, I work as a psychic for most of the shows. And part of my process as a psychic is to go in with as much isolation as possible so that I don't have the possibility of being front-loaded about a location. And so the thing with that is I don't watch the shows because they might investigate a house or a circumstance that at some later date I may get called up to investigate as well. And then I'm going to have to say no. Like the Thomas House episode, I wasn't going down there originally as a psychic. I wouldn't have, because I've been there twice before. I was there for a Paranormal State episode, and then we were there for a field trip with Paranormal State. I was there, I talked with the owners. I know a piece about the house and its haunting that we aren't allowed to talk about because people are still alive and things. And the only reason I agreed to do anything that involved putting on the blindfold for this Thomas House episode was, Katrina and Jack said, there's we found a location that's near here that we'd like you to do a walkthrough in. How much do you know about Red Boiling Springs? And I'm like, it was a resort town, the Thomas House is here, and the hotel you put me up in is creepy as fuck. And beyond that, like, it's way in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's like an hour's drive from the airport. So the only reason I agreed to do a walkthrough there was it was something that I hadn't seen before. So I've never watched an episode of The Dead Files. I've heard people, I think I've met Deshavi, Steve, at a Scarefest, but I mean like briefly and in passing. And he probably doesn't even remember me. Like he had a booth over here, I had a booth over there, and it was just kind of like, hey, we're at a convention, yo. I've never met, it's not Amy Bruni, Amy Allen? Yeah. So I can't speak to it, haven't watched it, really haven't interacted with people. All I can say is, and this isn't the first time somebody's come to me with basically a bill for either having someone try to cure them of a hex, someone to perform an exorcism, someone who was claiming that they were haunted by demons and they were going to literally die if this person didn't do their particular and unique thing to them. And I have seen price tags as high as $10,000 fucking dollars for shit like that. And I have some really strong opinions, less about like, you know, people shouldn't do that. It's a scam. Like when you have someone in the paranormal, or actually it doesn't have to just be paranormal, because this happens across the board. Psychics, paranormal, religions do this too. Like there's plenty of like Christian preachers out there that will do this to you. You've got across the board folks who will say there is something wrong with you. You probably already have something that you've come to them with, that you're like, you know, there's a lot of things that are going wrong in my life, or like I've got this chronic health problem, or my daughter has this chronic health problem, my son has this chronic health problem, and we've tried everything and I don't know what's going on, and I hear that you have a different approach. Well, when it is an unethical person who is basically a con person, they are a grifter, they go, well, you see, I have exclusive knowledge that has been gifted to me by insert ancient masters, insert angels, insert some mysterious book or some lineage tradition that they learned from their great-great-grandma Betty, who is half some obscure tribe of Indian, just to make it sound exotic. And then they tell you that, of course, only they can fix it, or that they have the know-how and it's only these rare ingredients that they have access to. So they've got, you know, this one crystal or this weird thing. I mean, here I am making an incense that requires some really rare ingredients. I had to go all over the place, had stuff getting shipped in from Iraq. I'm sure I'm on a list now. Egypt, this tiny little island in Crete, the frickin' forge in Italy. And so like this is something that's, you know, honestly rare and weird, but I'm not gonna like show up at your house and say, all right, so the only way I can kick your spirit out is if I burn Kyphi, and by the way, it's $40 an ounce and I'm gonna need a pound. That's some bullshit. Anyway, so I was really angry when I saw what that amounted to. And then also that, you know, it sounded like this team, this group specifically that had worked with them, didn't teach them anything about protecting themselves, and actually did the opposite, like told them what you're doing is wrong, what you're doing is actually harming you, throw out all of the things that you've been using. We don't agree with that, that's not okay. Your belief system is different from ours and it is wrong. Even Lorraine Warren, with whom I had some disagreements ideologically, she and Ed were very firm about working with the belief system of the clients. I mean, certainly they ended up with a lot of Catholics because they themselves were Catholic and that's what they could speak to. But you don't go into a Jewish family and ask them to kiss a crucifix and take holy water and take communion and say that that's the only way you're going to fix their problem. That's not just rude. It's what's the religious version of racist? Because that's what that is. So anyway, I've got very strong feelings about this. Bottom line, never seen the Dead Files. Heard about it, obviously, because I work in the industry. And beyond that, can't say anything. There's one show and one show only that I am an inch away from going on record, but I think everybody can see this one and go, yeah, that's bullshit. And I'm not sure that that show even tries not to be bullshit now. So in that case, like that one, I'm so close because, and unfortunately, like there's some stuff that like I'm actually legally obligated not to talk about. But let me say, for any of the shows, if your bullshit meter's going off, trust it. Even if I'm on it and you're just like that couldn't be real, because guess what? I don't need you to believe in me. I'm not doing this because I want to convince you that stuff exists. I go and do the psychic walkthroughs that I do as it's a personal quest to understand how this stuff works and what are the limits of this ability and what kind of information can I get and what is really going on. Because as someone who also has a psych background, who has a fairly scientific way of approaching this stuff, and who was, as much as I grew up in a family that was psychic and believed all this stuff, also grew up in a family that encouraged me to be rational and skeptical and objective about it. The only thing I can say for sure, something's going on. And I don't really know what. I can tell you what I believe, what my experiences have inspired me to believe, but belief is not fact. Belief is not objective. Belief is my personal conclusion based on what I've experienced. So what I'm doing for the shows, I want more experience to better understand what I've decided to believe. And I don't think my beliefs have to be your beliefs. Actually, I'd rather you come up with your own beliefs. And if we don't agree on what we believe, that's totally okay. Actually, I'd rather that happen. The more perspectives we have, the better everything is. As long as we're willing, to talk with one another about it openly, in a friendly way, to listen to one another about it, and to avoid that sort of knee-jerk urge to enforce our beliefs on others, to tell them that no bad, because it's not what we would do. Because it's not how belief should work.
There was a
sorry.
There's actually been a
soapbox. Sorry,
bunch
soapbox.
of questions, including people saying they love when you go on tangents. I do too. Tangents are the best.
Pretty sure she married me just to listen to me talk.
But there was a question a little bit ago about whether you wear anything to protect yourself from any negative energies, or what you would recommend for.
So I have a different take on wearing things for stuff like that, and it's going to be in line with my philosophies, which is like, if you see me on episodes, you've probably seen this, and you've probably seen this ring, and they are very meaningful objects to me. I do not believe that the objects themselves protect me, but wearing them, I have a lot of associations with these objects. This ring, which we finally had to actually repair. I got this ring when I was 17. I scribed a word inside of it, which is sort of a word which at the time, and even so, is an expression of my sense of who I am and what I am, what my path is, and what my soul is. And no, I'm not going to share it with you. It's on the inside of the ring for a reason. But at 17, that was my dedication to be true to that, to pursue it, even if it took me to weird and unbelievable places. And this is my promise to myself, that this is my path. Even though part of it may look dark, I will walk it. So 17 is a long time ago now. I am more than 17 years older than 17 at this point, by a good chunk. And this ring has been with me through thick and through thin, through some truly extraordinary ordeals. And so there's a lot built up with it. And it's an anchor to me to bring me back to me. By my beliefs, the ring has no intrinsic power to it. It helps that it's made out of silver, and silver is associated with the moon, and I have more connection to night than I do with the sun and day. It helps that it's onyx, and onyx is black, and that is a grounding stone, and black is another thing that speaks to me because it's about the darkness and the mysteries that we don't always want to look at, and that's a part of my path. But the real value to me is it's a psychological touchstone to all of those things. And I've worn it with so much habit that even if I have an experience that just has my head spinning, I can remind myself, this is me. I am here. This is my body. So it helps me ground. This as well is a representation of my faith. I don't talk too extensively about my personal belief, my personal system, because it's really not, especially Paranormal State, like most everything there was Catholic, Christian. I was there as a representative of the pagan community, but I'm a very unique flavor of pagan. I'm not a witch, and Elfie, to be fair, isn't technically isn't a Wiccan in the sense that they tried to present her either. Her story is much more complicated as well. But it is 2 Egyptian letters. The Ankh means life. It's often associated with eternal life. And the scarab is change, metamorphosis, transformation. And so simply this means life is change. Lives change and are changing. And it's a significant part of a lot of stuff. And the fact that it is an Egyptian icon, that it recalls a culture, was never intended to be a cultural appropriation on my part. It's that I feel some ties to that place, to parts of its culture a very, very long time ago. And I would never presume to dictate what someone who is Egyptian now should do or say about themselves, their culture, or their religion, but also acknowledge that the Egypt that I'm talking about is several invasions and cultural shifts away from the people who live there now. And honestly, most of that's just scattered to the winds anyway. But it has meaning for me. All of our symbols, when it comes down to it, no matter what that symbol is, what you want to ask anybody is, what does this mean to you? Its use for me on investigations is, if I do, again, feel overcome, overwhelmed, unanchored, this is a reminder that I have faith, I have a belief. There is a way in which I have chosen to accept a vision of how the world works. And it's a choice. There are beliefs that I have chosen to accept, and this is a representation of those. And by those beliefs, I have the power to protect myself. And more than that, I have the power to fight back if something's attacking me. And those are core to my belief as well. So it reminds me, I'm not a victim, I'm a badass.
That was awesome. Where can people find more of your awesome videos? And
oh yeah, Illyria is reminding me to be also a business person, which does not come naturally to me, but I've got a Patreon. So there's a lot of videos all over the place. I'm doing this because, I mean, who's not stir crazy? We're under lockdown until the 29th of May, and honestly, let's be honest. Let's be really brutally honest. We're probably going to be socially distancing for months. Months and months. All of my friends who are involved in the medical field, they're just kind of like, well, I don't want to burst your bubble, but get used to wearing masks. So doom and gloom aside. So these are fun and free, and I'm going to do it as we do the Kyphi, and all of you will get to keep me company while I melt frankincense into honey, which is not a small undertaking. And then while I boil this final result down over the last time, it was the course of 7 hours. I don't think we will live stream for 7 hours, but trust me, it's boring as shit, so I might. Anyway. I've got a bunch of stuff on YouTube. I got a bunch of stuff on Twitter. I just did like kind of a play-by-play for the Portals to Hell episode on Twitter. All of my IDs online, I tried to be consistent. They're under one ID. And the thing is since every variation of M. Belanger and Michel Belanger was taken, and the Belanger is taken by a certain Jeff, only he goes by Belanger, it's Seth Anakim. And that's another word that has meaning mostly just to me. But it's SETHANIKEEM, and if you pop that into YouTube, if you look here on, if you're on Facebook, that's the ID that this Facebook account is under. My Twitter, my Instagram, anything that is officially me is under that. I think those are really the only ones that I'm on. Patreon, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.
And there's, I mean, your website for.
Oh yeah, that's right. I've got a website. It's my first and last name.com. That's pretty easy. MichelBelanger.com. .com.
So fancy, so official. All right. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for being here. And I'm sure we're going to
Oh, we'll do it again tomorrow.
Yep.
There's another step tomorrow. I do want to say, so something showed up in the mail. And I wanted to thank Gary Tripp because this is cute. This is super cute. This is a little pop Cthulhu. And if people know that, like, I do a lot of, like, literary research and horror and stuff, Lovecraft is he's a problematic person, but he's had a really interesting impact on horror and a bunch of other stuff. And Cthulhu is just cute and adorable. And thank you so much, Gary. This is, he's going to have I haven't figured out where he's going to go, but he's going to have a place of honor on probably one of the Lovecraft collection
bookshelves.
Yeah, web shelf? What was I even trying to say there?
That was an interesting mashup of website where information is stored and bookshelf where information and Cthulhu's are stored.
I'm starting to spout word salad, so perhaps it is time to stop the stream before I embarrass myself by talking about...
and we're ending the broadcast.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, goodbye everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.
Bye all.